Hey guys, hope all is well for you. So putting together a gaming PC, a budget one in 2021 is very, very difficult. Not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. And while putting together this system right here, I realized the real question we should be asking right now is whether or not it's actually worth building a budget system. So let's take a look at what I put into this $600 gaming PC, how it performs, and then we're going to talk about whether or not actually building a system like this is even worth it in 2021. Starting with the CPU, I went with the Ryzen 5 1600AF. It's a 6-core, 12-thread processor, and this processor will boost up to 3.6 gigahertz and also has a base clock of 3.2 gigahertz. And in my opinion, back in the day, about a year ago, this was definitely the best value CPU on the market when you could pick it up brand new off of Amazon for only $85. Unfortunately, we're in 2021 now. A year has passed, and you can't do that now. You can't buy it brand new off Amazon. However, you still can pick it up for around $105 used on Hardware Swap. Over the past 2 weeks, there's been about 5 sales. I think that's what I had, was 5 total sales. And the cherry on the top was that none of the posts that were selling this actual chip had a ton of PMs either. So if you can find a post with the 1600AF being up for sale, you'll be able to pick one up without too much of a hassle. Of course, some of you may be left out, and in that case, I'd be more so to recommend you take a look at the i3 10100 or the i5 10400, as well as their F variants, which are basically the same exact chips, but they just don't have the integrated graphics within them. You can typically find the i3s for around $100 to $115, and then the i5s go for around $140 to $155, depending on where you're buying them. Now, the performance of the i3s will be basically on par with the 1600AF in gaming. It'll lack a little bit in productivity compared to the 1600AF, but gaming, it'll be on par. And then the i5 should outperform the 1600AF across the board in gaming as well as productivity, but it's also going to cost a little bit more too. You also need to keep in mind that if you pick up an Intel CPU, those Intel CPUs are not compatible with AMD motherboards, and the motherboard I'm going to talk about today in this video. That said, you're going to have to make sure that you pick up an Intel-based motherboard rather than the ones I talk about in this video. And don't worry, I will be sure to drop some suggestions of my own down in the description box below for those of you guys who decide to go that route. Now, for those of you guys who were able to get your hands on the 1600AF for around $105, I would suggest grabbing the ASRock B450M Pro 4 MATX motherboard to pair it with. It's not the board I actually used in this build, which is the Asus B450-i Strix, but it's a solid, cheaper option than what I used. And honestly, I only used the board I did because I already had it on hand. Either board will also provide you with a solid upgrade path to basically any 6 to 8 core chip in the AM4 lineup. And so if you wanted to jump up to something like the 5800X, you certainly could in the future with no worries. Now, since it is a budget board, I wouldn't really recommend overclocking one of those 8-core chips on either of those 2 boards I just mentioned, the one I have here or the Pro 4M, but at stock or undervolted, they should run perfectly fine. For the memory, I used a kit of Team Group T-Force Delta RGB memory, 16 gigabytes at 3200 megahertz. Memory is a bit pricey right now, and so I would just suggest to you guys to pick up the cheapest 16 gigabyte kit that runs at 3000 or 3200 megahertz. And you'll see in my parts list down below, I actually just use a parametric filter, and so I would just suggest that you loosely follow that. We then have our storage drive, and for that, I'm using a 500 gigabyte inland premium M.2 drive. I have literally recommended this drive a bajillion times, and it is such a great value drive. It's incredibly fast, it's cheap, and 500 gigs is also a decent capacity to get you started with. Well, that is unless you decide you want to play Warzone, and in that case, you of course are going to need like a server room just to store the game. On a not so sarcastic note, storage is also something that is super easy and affordable to expand upon in the future. And so once you can, I would highly suggest throwing in a 2 terabyte hard drive for more game storage, because honestly, again, if you're gonna play games like Warzone, 500 gigs will not go far at all. Warzone itself is like a 100 gig game. Next up, we have the case. And for that, I chose to use the Dark Flash DLM21. I have the standard DLM21, which looks great and has awesome features such as like a swivel door. Look at this, guys. Look at that. That's baller, guys. But make sure that you guys grab the mesh version. I have just a flat panel. Well, this isn't the flat panel. This is the grooves and stuff, but there's a mesh version of this. It'll provide a lot more airflow for you guys, and it typically goes for about the same price. So highly suggest the DLM21 mesh versus the one that I actually got, which is a solid panel with the grooves and cool looking things on there. But basically for like 50 to 60 bucks, it's one of my favorite MATX cases currently on the market. It's super easy to build in. It doesn't take a lot of room on your desk, which is awesome. And it looks great too, right? But there is going to be one big downside with this case in a budget build. And if you had more money, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. but this case doesn't include any fans. And so to compensate for the lack of fans, I threw in a 3-pack of Asia Horse FS 9002 RGB fans in white, and I got the white ones because the case is white, right? You get a black case, maybe you get the black ones, and so they match. It's up to you. These are about $35 for a pack of 3, and so you can try to find cheaper kits if you want to save some money here, but $12 a fan, that's really, really, really cheap, so I don't know how much luck you're gonna have finding, you know, again, cheaper fans. Overall, I'm a pretty big fan of these fans. See what I did there? They are super quiet, move a ton of air, and they look great too, but I have encountered an issue that I wanna talk to you guys about, and I also wanna talk to you guys about some Amazon reviews. Both positive and negative ones have this comment in it, so I wanted to bring it to your attention so that you guys were aware. So basically, I originally purchased my first kit of them back in December of 2020, and by the end of April 2021, so 4 months, the LED started to turn this weird green color. I contacted them, and they were happy to send out a new kit. And they were happy to send out a new kit to me, and I got it within a week. So it was cool. It was a really good, responsive customer service, and I really like that from Asia Horse. But that's not even the issue that people have been reporting on Amazon. There's also reports of oil leakage, even amongst the good reviews too. So it's not just bad negative reviews saying that there's oil leakage. Even some of the good ones say, yeah, there's oil leakage. This is something I haven't experienced with any of the fans I've tested, but it seems like a lot of the reviews mention it, like I just said. And I'm not saying don't pick up these fans or this kit. I just wanted you guys to be aware just in case you decide you want to duplicate this particular build and you wanted to grab those fans too. Also, while we're on the subject of budget RGB fans, let me know your guys' favorites down in the comments below. I'm looking for more to expand my catalog of fans so I can test out more and give you guys more takes on them and review more and so forth. So I would definitely love to hear what you guys like to use most. Now, to power the system, I went with the Enermax Marble Bronze 80 Plus Bronze units. I have the 750 watt version, but I'd say just grab the 550 watt or the 650 watts units instead so you guys can save a little bit of money. Overall, this is a solid unit for budget to mid-range builds. It's a semi-modular. It has high-end Japanese capacitors, and it also has all the voltage protections you like to see on your power supplies. It also has a really quiet fan in it. Even under heavy load, I barely heard it, which is a big deal to me. I'm a big noise guy. I don't like a lot of noise, so that's a massive plus to me as well. And now to round out our list, we have the GTX 960 2GB model for our graphics card. Yes, this ancient beast has come alive. So this is a super old card coming out back in 2015, and in particular, this is gonna be the MSI 100 million edition, which marked MSI selling 100 million graphics cards. That's cool, right? This is also the first GPU I had ever purchased for myself. So as you can hear from my enthusiasm, this has definitely has a place in my heart just because it was the first one I was able to afford and able to buy. Love this card, guys. Now it's also super affordable in comparison to everything else currently on the market if you're gonna go buy used or buy a graphics card at all. And after accounting for every sale on Hardware Swap over the past 2 weeks, this card averages a sale price of about $110. You may also be able to find it on eBay, but the price is gonna be a little bit more hit or miss as they've sold for as low as 50 bucks or as even high as $220 over the past few days. And so, as of right now, if you built this exact system, this exact thing right here, your total would come out to being about $611.98. That's really not too shabby of a price to build your own gaming PC here in early Q2 of 2021, especially considering you can easily upgrade this kind of system down the road to improve some of its lacking performance, as we'll talk about in just a second. So speaking of benchmark performance, that kind of stuff, let's start off by talking about the cooling and noise performance, and it's pretty solid overall. Although I will say it's nothing to write home about. While gaming, the system stays relatively cool with a max CPU temperature of 75 degrees Celsius and a max GPU temperature of 68 degrees Celsius. This is also while being very, very quiet with an average noise output of just 36 decibels, and that's me measuring that from about 20 inches from the front of my case. So that's kind of where I sit when I'm gaming. It's about 20 inches from me to the case, and that's why I read it at that point. And keep in mind, this is not the non-mesh version. So if you get the mesh version, you'll probably see a big drop in both CPU and GPU temperatures as well. Now, jumping into the gaming benchmarks, let's start with GTA 5 at 1080p high settings. And keep in mind, for GTA 5, high settings is actually the second lowest settings in GTA 5. Anyway, this PC was able to push an average frame rate of 114 frames with these settings. It was very smooth, very playable, and I chose these settings because the GPU is very limited due to only having 2 gigabytes of VRAM. If we pushed it to higher settings, which I did try to do, it would actually push the VRAM beyond where it needed to be or where the limit was, and that would cause some pretty bad instability when I was trying to play the game. Next up was Assassin's Creed Valhalla at 1080p low settings. Yes, I drilled this card with Valhalla to show you guys how it performs in a more modern and demanding title. In this game, the build averaged a frame rate of 36 frames. Yes, I said 36 frames. Honestly, it also had really rough 1% and 0.1% lows, and I don't think I personally could deem this as a playable game on this particular system. I then moved on to Total War Troy at 1080p high settings, and we got a very playable average frame rate of 49 frames. What's nice here is that since I tested it at the high preset, you can always drop the settings a little bit more in order to improve frames to your liking. The next game I tested was Sniper Elite 4 at 1080p high settings. This was a very playable title with an average frame rate of 63 frames. And again, you have some wiggle room here too, if you want to bring down the settings to increase your frame rates a little bit. I then tested Hitman 2 at 1080p low settings, and this title was certainly playable with an average frame rate of 54 frames. It would have been nice to see some higher 1% lows here, but overall not too bad of an outing for this sub $600 gaming PC. Next up was Fortnite at 1080p low preset with the render resolution set to 100%. This was very playable with an average frame rate of 143 frames. And while I'm pretty much garbage at Fortnite, my son and I were actually able to place top 5 in our first game while I was playing on this particular system. So the last game I tested with this system was Valorant at 1080p high settings. This build averaged a frame rate of 161 frames at these settings, and the gameplay was super smooth. And so while the results were far from spectacular, I think we can all agree on that, I was actually quite surprised by them, as I thought this card would be absolutely just demolished here in 2021 due to only having 2 gigabytes of VRAM. That's a huge, it's a huge drawback of having the 960 in your system. But I could see this build being a starter place, right? A solid starting place for someone who wants to play some esports titles or less intensive indie games. But I do think that AAA titles are out of place for the system, even like older ones, 2016, 2017, 2018, those ones are going to struggle a little bit on this even today, right? That said, I did also want to reflect on this particular build, and I want to talk about whether or not you should even build something like this or even consider it for $600, because for my research, there's not much more you can do today for $600 if you're absolutely set on building a PC. So if you want to build a PC, this is basically the best you can get from what I have gathered so far. So yes, this kind of system is upgradable, it's customizable, you get what you want, right, kind of, but I'm not completely convinced that this is the route to go. So what you might be better off doing is getting a non-F variant of the 11400 and playing off its terrible integrated graphics until you can get your hands on the elusive retail cards that are not super overpriced. So maybe something like the 1660 Super for like $300, $310 is what they typically go for if you can get a chance at that. Still overpriced, but not super overpriced. Or you might wander your eyes over to the Build a PC Sales subreddit, where Dell sales are often posted for between $600 to $700, and those builds include either the 1650 Super or the 1660 Super. Yes, I get it, it's a pre-built, but the performance is going to be a lot better than this kind of system for the same price. Pre-builds aren't going to be upgradable though, so it's going to be really up to you guys what your plan is and what you want. Do you want pure performance and you're okay with going to pre-build, or do you want to build your own and then just upgrade it down the line? Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of this build down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.